They say they believe in Scripture, but that's not the kind of authority they're going to appeal to. And we'll talk about that. So what is the logical fallacy of an argument from authority? That is insisting that a claim is true simply because a valid authority or expert on the issue said it was true without any other supporting evidence offered. Also see the appeal to a false authority. Okay, so that's logicallyfallacious.com. There's all kinds. If you Google logical fallacies, you will get a long list of them, and you can find examples of Calvinists committing all of them. Okay, so we're trying to cover the top 3 here to try to keep it simple for tonight. So how does this look? What do they appeal to? Okay, so like we said a second ago, it's not scriptural authority. They will say sola scriptura, but when you look at, if you follow them online, you're going to find them posting all kinds of stuff from men, right? So they say sola scriptura. They say they believe the Bible. They have to in order to pass off as Christians to other Christians. But they actually are not going to appeal to the actual Bible itself. They're going to appeal to a slant on it or what other people have said about it, or a framing that they impose on it, but not Scripture itself. Okay, and I could show you, if we will go back to the sermons that we've covered on James Ross, I could show you this in every instance. So what is the authority they're going to appeal to? They're going to appeal to credentials. So when you are in an argument with them and you find yourself disagreeing, hey, I disagree with your Calvinism, I disagreed with what you said in this sermon, they're going to say something like, well, have you been to seminary? How many semesters of Greek do you have? Okay. Now, the first on round 1 of the credential contest, okay, it's like a little urinating contest here. On round 1, it's going to be their credentials versus yours, okay? That's round 1. And then you might come back and say, oh, you've had 6 semesters of Greek. I've actually had 12 semesters of Greek from Calvinist professors. You could say something like that. And now they're going to appeal to someone who outdoes you. Well, Dr. So-and-so, you see, so-and-so and so-and-so, or they might appeal to somebody who is a martyr. Are you trying to tell me that, okay? But they'll go to credentials, and sometimes martyrdom can substitute for credentials. There's this weird thing with humans where we let victimhood substitute for virtue. And while victimhood is terrible, it does not equal virtue. They show, like a woman with her kids goes to a battered wife shelter, and you think, oh, that poor woman, battered wife shelter. Well, maybe the husband caught her trying to film porn videos with the kids and beat her up. You see how that's different now? Just because she's a victim doesn't mean she's virtuous. Okay? Now, I'm not saying anything justifies beating somebody up, so don't get me wrong. I'm just trying to give you some perspective here, that just because somebody appears to be a victim does not mean they are virtuous. I mean, even if they got burned at the stake for their faith, that's horrible, that's terrible, and God bless them for sticking to what they said they believed in, but that doesn't make them virtuous, and it doesn't make them correct. It's not a sound epistemic tool for whether somebody or someone was correct or right or anything like that. So we need to bear that in mind. So credentials, and then so they know somebody with more credentials than you, and then they cite them, and then somebody with more credentials than them, and then it just goes. So it's just a never-ending line of turtles. Which one's holding up the earth, right? So that's an argument from authority that doesn't make any sense. And they're going to go with the position. I am the pastor. You should not, I am God's anointed. Don't you realize that God placed me here and I'm supposed to lead you, not the other way around? So they're going to use their position. And they're especially going to use their position with political maneuvering around the congregation when it comes to if this thing blows up. If you're actually trying, especially if you're dealing with a stealth Calvinist. Like Randall says over here, okay? Randall says, usually appeal to famous dead guy authority. And that's what we are calling the great giants of the faith, the Puritans. John MacArthur, my grandson, his name is John Owen MacArthur. He's proud of that. He doesn't realize what a crazy lunatic ideologue that makes him sound like, to sacrifice your kid on the altar of your ideology. You know, if I was named John Owen Thompson, I would change my name as soon as I could get to the courthouse. I'd change it to anything but that. I would not want to be named after a neo-Gnostic ideologue, okay, who committed idolatry and hates God. So now what's going to happen is, like, they're appealing to all these famous dead guys, right? And you're still trying to appeal to Scripture. Now what they're going to do is they're going to use that. Do you think that you're smarter than John Knox? You telling me you think you're smarter than Charles Spurgeon? You think you're smarter than him? You think God's going to show something to you that he didn't show to Charles Spurgeon, that he withheld from him? You think you're smarter than Jonathan Edwards and Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God? You think you're smarter than George Whitefield? You think you're smarter than John Knox? You think you're smarter than all these people? You think God gave you some kind of special revelation? That's the angle they're going to take. Try to make it sound like they're going to try to frame it. See, they become eventually, when they get so twisted in their wickedness, they become an absolute master at framing things in a way completely other than how you intend. And so one of the reasons we at Beyond the Fundamentals, our edification model is an Ephesians 4:16 edification model when we are doing FSI, Full Stature Initiative. It's where we meet typically on Wednesday nights, and we edify each other in the Ephesians 4:16 model. What I'm doing right now is more or less broadcast, except for the amount of dialogue that we have here with the chat going back and forth. Okay. But it's longer term. You could say that it's not so much broadcast because it's online. People can comment and people can respond to it, and then we can talk about it later. Basically broadcast. But the mature biblical model of edification is the Ephesians 4:16 edification model, which people are supposed to mature out of Ephesians 4:11 through 12 and mature into Ephesians 4:13 through 16. Okay, which is a peer-to-peer mesh network topology version. And in order for that to work, everybody has to say what their perspective is, and they need to be Ash negative. In other words, you need to don't waver on what you genuinely see just because a majority of other people around you see it differently. Don't cave into that, okay? The strength of the Ephesians 4:16 edification model is the different perspectives, okay? Any perspective on something is necessarily a reduction of the total information. So I'm in my house right now. If I look at my house from the front yard, I can't see the backyard. If I go to the backyard, I can't see the back of the house. But if I go to the backyard and look at the house, I can see the back, but now I can't see the front. So I either have to trust that the front hasn't changed because I have to travel through time in order to get to the back, or I have to have a person back there who's looking at it or maybe filming it for me, and I have to trust that that isn't rigged with, or that I can trust that person's account of it, you see. But I can't actually see all of this place at once. I'm in my office right now. I can't see the kitchen. For all I know, a tornado could have taken the kitchen out 2 seconds ago, and I just don't know yet. I don't know. So perspective is everything, and you need parallax. You need as much parallax as you can get. Parallax is what you have with your eyeballs. Stereoscopic vision, you see from two angles. That's what gives you peripheral vision and the ability to see in 3 dimensions, okay? The more eyes you can have, the better. The more cameras you can have, the better. The more perspective you can have, the better. Now, when we limit all of our perspective down to, you have to agree with this statement of faith in order to be in this church. Now, we've just reduced all that perspective down to one. It's like everybody in the whole church knocking out both their eyes except for one person who's allowed to keep one eye. And that way we all agree on everything. So agreement about, semantically disambiguated propositional conclusions is not the goal of Christianity. The product of Christianity is the transformed individual, not conclusions, not propositional conclusions. You see, we tend to think that propositional conclusions like this or like this, that's the goal of Christianity, to get those things right. And I want to go to a church that has those things right. No, 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 no. That is not the product of Christianity. The product of Christianity is a person who is like Christ, who behaves, moves, and operates in the way that is Christ. And you can't do that with something that's stagnant. Okay? All those things, this stuff is stagnant. It's all stagnant. It doesn't move. It's like stagnant water. And it becomes infested with, bacteria and maggots and all kinds of other things. And if you're thirsty and you're outside and you come across stagnant water, you don't want to drink it because it's full of, nasty stuff. It'll even have a little film over it. And even non-Calvinists, when we talk about non-Calvinism, is just as stagnant, like provisionism has the same problem. It's just as stagnant as Calvinism. And so when, we're concerned about getting stealth Calvinism out of churches, but it's like taking all the water out of a mud puddle and then pouring clean water back in it and then walking away for 4 days. Guess what's going to happen? It's going to get infested again, because that's what happens to stagnant water. So the deal is to not be stagnant water. Out of his belly shall flow rivers of running water. Water is used many times in Scripture. Cleanse it by the washing of the water of the Word. And all the washing that took place in the Old Testament had to be with flowing water. It could not be with stagnant water. It had to be with flowing water. So there's something to that, you see. We have to have something that's flowing. Now are ye clean through the word which I have spoken unto you. They will cite things like John 17:9, but they can never bring themselves to read John 17:21 to 22. So they can't get it in context. They will cite John 6:44, but they can't keep reading to John 12:32. They will cite Romans 9:18, but they can't keep going to Romans 11:32. They will cite Ephesians 1:4, but they can't quite keep going to Ephesians 2:12. You see? They got a problem where they just can't keep reading. They just can't keep going. So all of Scripture is not their authority. Isolated, pre-framed, cherry-picked, non-contextual passages is what they will use when they say they're using scriptural authority. But they're not. They don't actually have scriptural authority. Take Scripture as a whole. They cannot take Scripture as a whole. It's not something they can do.